legacy media is up in arms over Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s testimony on Capitol Hill yesterday. Kennedy participated in the House Judiciary Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government hearing on censorship, where committee Democrats laid into him for what they called anti-Semitic, racist, and conspiracy theory-ridden rhetoric. Here's CNN's Dana Bash, and notice the snarky chyron.
So you just heard it. Defamation, distortions, misrepresentations, reading between the lines, a citing motive, guilt by association. That is how RFK Jr. offers an answer for every accusation. But believing him that he's just a contrarian, that he never spread hate, requires ignoring his own words.
And here is MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell accusing Kennedy of having a drug addiction to attention, just like Donald Trump's, in his monologue on Thursday. Let's watch some of that.
It is very clear his campaign for president is nothing but a stunt. He will not win a single primary. Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for president, and Robert Kennedy Jr. is not. The only real political question to ask him is, will he support the Democratic nominee for president, or will he run as a third-party candidate, which will be the most help he could possibly give Donald Trump in the presidential election? I've been very reluctant to speak about Robert Kennedy Jr. on this program because I have not wanted to enable his access to the drug addiction that he has never conquered. The drug addiction that has been with him for all of his adult life. The addiction to attention. The very same addiction that has driven Donald Trump in all of his adult life.
Okay, I think that monologue's going to age like milk, to be honest, because when you see a candidate polling as well as RFK Jr. is, obviously this is a candidate that's going to be impactful in the primaries, not just be someone who runs for a third party. And when the mainstream media gets like this, when they get threatened by an outsider, and it's not a political establishment darling that's the favorite or running for office and polling well, just this typical meltdown. I don't understand how any of the viewers of CNN can watch that and take it seriously. He just openly said, you know, I use my power as a reporter and member of the media to decide which candidates get attention and which ones don't, regardless of how popular they are or how they're polling. That's not your job as a reporter. You're supposed to tell the people about the candidates that are running, not accuse them of having a drug addiction to attention. I think anyone running for public office has an interesting relationship with attention. I don't think RFK Jr. is unique in that. But I think you have a duty as a member of the media, Lawrence O'Donnell, to report on the candidates that are the top candidates polling when you have a primary contest for president. So this rubs me entirely the wrong way.
I agree. They're so self-righteous. They refuse to take anyone seriously who isn't a pick of the establishment. And it's just gross. I mean, the smarminess of that CNN chyron. Robert F. Kennedy denies saying things that he totally said, with Dana Bash accusing him of misinformation. It's just ridiculous. And she goes on to cite a couple of examples. And it's quite funny because her description of what he said doesn't match the clip that she shows us right after. And these cable news talking heads do this repeatedly, where anything that they don't like, regardless of who says it, is disinformation or misinformation and needs to be cut off at the knees. They won't let the American people decide for themselves. How about present the information and allow your viewers to be adults? Give them the opportunity to decide for themselves whether they think someone is telling the truth or not. Give them the opportunity to decide whether a candidate has a drug addiction to attention. And just treat them like responsible adults and voters, because that's what they are. I'm so tired of the dumbing down of content for people. It's reminiscent of 2016, where Trump supporters were voting against their own interests, or they didn't know what was good for them. They're falling into racist sexism and white supremacy. It's all just like a smarmy school teacher talking down to their kindergarten class. And this is why their ratings are cratering. This is why people don't trust the media, is exactly this reaction to RFK Jr.
Yeah, and when you have someone comparing RFK Jr. to Donald Trump, No, not even close. There might be things you disagree with that RFK has said before, but he is nowhere near a Donald Trump type candidate. Their policy platform is vastly different, and they did the same exact thing. It's the same playbook as Bernie Sanders. They want everyone to be afraid of candidates that come from outside of the political establishment, that come from outside of the political norms they expect when you have a candidate running for president in the United States. If they're not acting in the way that they would expect or playing by the rules of the game, suddenly you're the same as every other outside candidate. No, the policy platform couldn't be more different, but they want people to make a decision on president based on personality, because they're coming from the outside of the political establishment, therefore they're in the same group and they're all the same. It just doesn't make any sense. The way they also talk about running with a third party as if it's like a crime or a violent act. How dare you question the two-party system we have in the United States? That shouldn't be a thing that seems so outrageous. You are someone who works for a huge news organization. You're Lawrence O'Donnell. You're very aware that there are multi-party systems in successful democracies in other countries. The idea of a third party in the United States seeming so absurd is just dishonest. And it's because they want to maintain the two-party system and have these two parties neatly defined as parties that will not represent the interests of the majority of Americans. And instead, when you have candidates that are running outside of the typical establishment construct, that's a threat to the neat two-party system that you have. That's why they're so afraid of a third party. And so that part of this was especially interesting. Just the tone, talking about a third party so pejoratively is funny to me.
Exactly, because they're terrified that he'll be a spoiler for their precious president, Joe Biden, who has been completely ineffective and arguably incapable of even performing the duties of president. Then you have this group called No Labels, which was founded, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And the whole point of No Labels was to try to find moderate candidates and perhaps establish a third-party candidate for presidential elections to give people an option besides the two Democrat and Republican candidates. And this year, they've now said that they basically are not going to field a third-party candidate that could potentially cost Joe Biden the election. And they'll only get involved if it's Trump versus Biden again. And doesn't that just demolish the whole spirit of the project if you are trying to determine whether or not one of the two-party candidates is good enough for you before you decide to do the mission of your organization, which is, again, to have no labels and to try to have a proposed third-party candidate that you think is better than the two alternatives. And there's been so many smears launched against RFK Jr. In this hearing yesterday on the Hill, the Democrat establishment was just hell-bent on trying to discredit him in any way possible. And they brought up some of his comments about COVID in regards to the Holocaust and some of the supposedly ethnic targeting comments that he made at that New York Post dinner. And they repeatedly took the worst possible interpretation. They were completely uncharitable to what he said he meant by those comments. And I understand that you don't want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt when they make comments that might come off the wrong way. But when you look at the entirety of RFK Jr.'s life and his career, there's no indication to me that this is a guy who's anti-Semitic or racist. And so I think you do give him the benefit of the doubt. But the Democratic establishment is so unwilling to do that. And even some of the Democrats on this panel tried to discredit him solely because he talks to Republicans and has Republicans supporting him, as if that's automatically a disqualifier for running for office. You would think someone who was able to reach across party lines would actually be a boost to their campaign and their legitimacy as opposed to a detriment.
Yeah, I think that argument being made by members of Congress on the front of censorship is self-defeating. Because if you follow the logic, here you are questioning RFK Jr., who's someone who's polling pretty well, who might get elected to public office in the United States and become someone in the highest public office you can obtain in the U.S., but will be elected to public office and serve in government. Here you are, a member of Congress, criticizing him for his views as a part of your argument for censorship of what's posted online. Who's doing that censorship? The government. So Do you want someone like RFK to be in charge of censorship if you don't agree with what he's saying? It's a self-defeating argument. You are saying that you want the government to censor things, and you're criticizing someone who could very likely be elected to public office and become the one doing the censoring. That argument is so self-defeating that it's ridiculous. We do need to establish better methods of verifying information online or educating the public so they can weed out what's true and what is false online. But by you saying RFK Jr. isn't successfully weeding through information, therefore we need the government to do censorship, but you're talking to someone who could very likely be the government one day, it just doesn't make sense if you follow the logical argument a few steps further. So completely disagree with members of Congress trying to make the argument in that way, especially considering who is in Congress today. Do you trust them to weed through information? We had Richard Blumenthal on the floor of Congress saying, do you commit to ending Finsta, when questioning the head of Facebook, now Meta? Come on, like Finsta is not a technology that can be ended. And the way that these members of Congress demonstrate on a day-to-day basis that they don't understand what's going on the internet really also tells us that they're not equipped to censor what's on the internet.
I think it's interesting, too, that Dana Bash didn't mention the fact that her ex-husband conveniently was one of those national security officials who signed on to that letter claiming the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. I didn't see a snarky chyron from her regarding that letter and how that turned out to be disinformation. So that's a little interesting to me. We'll be back with more Rising after this.